Hello and welcome to Amb Talks. This is Kamal, and our today's topic is how to improve your life through Septemics. Now, what is it and how it works? To answer these questions, we are having a very special guest with us today. But before that, let me welcome my co host, Kiran, who is having a keen interest in human psychology. Hey, Kiran, thank you for being on the show.
Hey Kamal, thanks for having me.
Now, our special guest is the person who has devoted more than 50,000 hours to study and practice various dimensions of human potential and development. Plus, he is also the author of a book titled Septemics. So, hey Jim, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you, Kamal.
Would you like to add anything to your intro?
Well, let me just say briefly that I am the discoverer of hitherto unknown natural phenomena which
Okay.
greatly aid in the understanding of people, from which I invented a revolutionary practical philosophic system called Septemics and published
Okay.
it in the book Septemics Hierarchies of Human Phenomena.
Yeah. Okay. So that it is. So, Jim, according to you, what should be the understanding of septemics for a normal person, like a person who's not an intellectual and he's not a college professor or anything? So,
Right.
what should be? Yeah.
Yeah. Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to human beings occur in a sequence of 7 levels. Literally, the word septemics means of or pertaining to 7. Septemics comprises a collection of scales or sequences, each of which breaks down various human phenomena into a hierarchy of 7 steps. There are 35 scales which span the spectrum of human experience, by which I mean any situation which arises in the life of any human being can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales.
Okay.
24 of the scales apply primarily to individuals, and 11 apply primarily to groups.
Okay. Okay. So that means it applies to everybody, each and every human, right?
Well, the short answer is yes. It cuts across all demographic groups. In other words, regardless of gender, age, ethnicity, socioeconomic level, or anything else, it applies. But I'll tell you who it doesn't apply to. It doesn't apply to people who don't want to improve themselves or their lives. Now, you might think, well, everybody wants to improve himself or his life, but that is not
Yes.
true. There are people such as psychopaths, sociopaths, narcissists, criminals, corrupt people, insane people who are not interested in improving themselves or their lives. These are people who are generally destructive.
Okay.
Okay, Jim. So that's really nice that we have or you have created such a amazing technique that applies to every human being. But I have a little concern regarding the people who are not psychopaths, but they are not aware about their goals or they are not having fixed aspirations. So how can we say that they can take the benefit from this septamics technique?
Okay, first of all, let me say, obviously, in order to use this book, you have to be able to read English. And I would say you have to be able to read English reasonably well. I mean, there are some
Mhm.
people who can write a check and maybe even read a newspaper, but would never read a book. So there are people who might read a book, but would not be able to grasp this book. Now, this book was written for the general public.
So as now that we are aware about the septamics technique, that it is for everyone who is having this aspiration to change themselves or to improve themselves. So how can we say that this technique of septemics is applicable to the people who are very ambitious, but they are stuck at some points in their life? So, but that is for sure that they know English, right?
Okay.
So they
Okay.
know the
So
language. They are
yes,
literate people, but they are
yes,
somewhere stuck in their life zones or in
right,
their works, maybe.
right.
Yeah.
The whole point of this book is to help people to get unstuck from whatever they're stuck in. That is the whole point. That is why I wrote the book. Let me explain something.
Hmm.
Every single human being is at some level on each of these 35 scales. And the book is written in such a way that it wraps around the reader. In other words, when you look at this material, it's almost like looking in a mirror. It's like putting on eyeglasses that clarify your vision and looking in a mirror. You see better what's there. You see who you are. And you
Yeah.
also, by the same token, can see better who other people are. The
Because
scale,
it's like a self-assessment. Sorry to interrupt. So it's like a self-assessment uh,
yes, and
of
other
levels.
assessment
Like,
also.
yeah, we can assess on a level on that scale of 7, right?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly. So let me complete my thought about this hypothetical. There's also a scale of allegiance. Anytime a relationship has deteriorated, it's always because the allegiance has deteriorated, right? A guy cheats on his wife. That's a deterioration of allegiance. So by finding out where you are on that scale, finding the correct level, you can then move yourself up to the next level up. And once you are
Hmm.
stabilized at that area, you can then again move yourself up to the next level, and you can make the same assessment for your mate. You might realize that this person is at such a low level of allegiance, they have betrayed you, you don't want them around.
Yeah.
I'm going to read you the names of the scales so that you will see exactly what phenomena this book addresses. Okay?
Okay.
These are
Okay.
the individual scales: the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales: the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Any one of these 35 scales could
Yeah.
dramatically improve the life of a person who uses it. Together,
Okay.
they will completely revolutionize your life. So that is my purpose. And let me tell you how I figured this out. I had a long career as a human development engineer. I have an engineering background. And when I entered engineering school, I thought I was going to be engineering physical things such as electrons, airfoils, motors, and so forth. But by the
Okay.
time I had my bachelor's degree, I realized that I wanted to engineer the human psyche. So I had a long career doing just that as human development engineer. As I was working with my clients, hundreds of clients for thousands of hours, I observed that they would improve in ways that were predictable to me. Now, I never told this to anyone, but I made notes. And as the years went by, I came to see that my clients were going up scales. In other words, the person would be at a certain level on a certain one of these 35 axes. and he would move up to the next level up. And very often I would know ahead of time exactly that was going to happen. So I would know the result of the session before the client did, even though I didn't tell him anything. My whole practice was about asking the right question, not telling anyone anything. So I started writing these down, and by about 1995, I had about 32 scales, which varied in length between 3 and 7 levels. Now, there was one scale in particular that by that time I absolutely knew was correct. It had 6 levels in it. In 95, I realized it had a 7th level. And when I inserted that 7th level into the 6th level scale, it manifested mathematically. Having been a mathematician, I understood that told me that this was natural law, because anything that has mathematics embedded in it, like, for example, the theory of relativity, it has mathematics embedded in it, is natural law. So when I saw this first scale that became mathematical, it had all kinds of implications that jumped out at me, more than just the scale. In other words, I saw it instead of seeing it linearly, I saw it in 2 dimensions. Then what I did is, I said, this is a book. I can go from helping people by the thousands to helping people by the millions if I put this data in a book and get it out to the general public. So in 95, I wrote the first version of the book, and I gave it to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees. And I asked them, what do you think of this? They all had extremely positive responses. So then I knew, okay, this is exactly what I think it is. And then I became devoted to putting this in a book that would be accessible to the general public. Now you have to realize I had 3 hurdles. First, I had to discover the phenomena itself, which was largely done by 1995, although I did find 3 more scales as I was writing the book. Then I had to take that phenomena and use it to create a workable philosophic system. That took about 20 years. I spent 25 years working on this book. And I'll tell you in a minute what I had to do in order to make this work. But the third hurdle I had was I wanted this to be comprehensible to the average reader. That was the most time-consuming aspect. And as a basis of comparison, when Sir Isaac Newton, the creator of the 3 laws of motion, he had to create calculus in order to use the 3 laws of motion. And he wrote the most famous book in the history of math and science, which is known popularly as the Principia. He was not writing that for the general public. He was writing that for other physicists and scholars and mathematicians. Similarly, when Einstein expressed his theories of relativity in 1905 and 1915, he did it in an academic paper, which was comprehensible to other physicists and mathematicians. He made no attempt to explain it to the general public. So I had a higher burden. I had to explain this technical subject to the average person. This is an 86,000 word book. So I had to go through it literally word by word to see how will the average reader interpret this. Now you have to realize there are 35 scales, each of which has 7 levels. So there are 245 different levels, each of which had to be verified and expressed in a way that would make sense to people. So I spent 25 years writing this, and there were many rewrites. One of the things I did, for example, was to put a glossary not only in front of each chapter, each of the 35 chapters, but even in front of the introduction, so that people would have the definitions that I was using for the name of each scale and for the name of each level in each scale. Another part of crafting this was the scales simply presented themselves to me, as I told you, in my sessions. So I had the scales, but in order to really understand them and explicate them, I had to know what axis each scale was on. In other words, what are these 7 levels measuring? That took a
Okay.
lot of work, and in some cases, it took me years to figure out what the axis was.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. So, Jim, that means if it is applies to everyone, then how can someone apply it? Like, are there some exercises that the person have to do, or or just the theory about mind or and these things as you mentioned? So, like, what the person gonna do after reading the book? Are there any exercises or anything that is there?
Yes, yes. So let me explain it this way.
Yeah.
First of all, you have to realize that each of the 35 scales is unique, okay?
Okay.
You cannot
Okay.
infer anything about scale A by studying scale B. You cannot infer anything about scale C by studying scale D. This is good news because each is unique, they span the spectrum of human experience.
Okay.
Now, some of them have very specific instructions how to use the scale. For example, the scale of communication, which by itself will change your life if you master it. There are very specific exercises how to communicate, how to master the 7 levels of communication in a way that will make you a master of communication. Okay? So there is variation from scale to scale because they're different. The other thing is, in the introduction to the book, I give very specific instructions how to use it on yourself and how to use it on another person. And when I say another person, I mean how to use it to assist another person. Now,
Okay.
I tell everyone never tell anyone anyone's level on any scale. It doesn't help the person. What you should do is figure out your own level. You don't have to tell anybody. If you can, if you wish, you may, but I don't advise it. But if you're helping someone else, help him figure it out himself. This can be done easily, I can assure you, because I've been seeing 27 years of results from this book. Because remember, the first version was written in 1995. So I've been seeing results for 27 years. And if you give this book to a person, he looks at the glossary and he studies the scale, he will be enlightened. It's not hard to do because this is natural phenomena. So it's not counterintuitive. So I tell with specificity how to use this to help another person. And I don't want to go too much into that because we'll use up all of our time, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
is detailed in the book how to use it on yourself and how to use it on others.
Yeah. So we can
Okay.
say that it is quite handy when it comes to self-improvement, like it is giving us the inputs, it is assessing us. Firstly, we are getting assessed itself, and then we can improve on our weaknesses, on our weak zones, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And
So,
let me
like
be more,
books like
go
Kaizen,
ahead.
like the Japanese method for transforming habits one small step at a time, by Sarah Harvey. In those
Uh-huh.
books, we can say that they are only about the like long-term goals, short-term goals. But the beautiful part of this book, of your Septemics technique, is that we are being assessed, and then we can say that we have to work on our those points, on those weaknesses, and then we can improve ourselves. So it's quite useful from that perspective, I can say.
Yes. Let me tell you how easy this is to do.
Yeah.
20 years ago, I was talking to a friend about politics and government.
Mm-hmm.
And I had an early transcript version of this book, which he had never seen. I said, wait a minute, let me show you something. So I opened the transcript to the page that had the scale of government. And I just handed it to him. I didn't say anything. So he took it, he looked at it for about a second or two, and he pointed and he said, right there, I'm right there. He found his level on that scale without my even suggesting that that's what it was for. I hadn't told him he was supposed to find his level. He just did it. That's how easy this is. And
Okay.
let me tell you something else that demonstrates this. I can tell you the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and many of the presidents previous to Roosevelt who I studied, such as Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln. Okay, so it's not hard to figure this out. People demonstrate and tell you their levels across all 35 axes. So I'll meet a guy, right? And I'll listen to him speak for 10 seconds. And I will be able to locate him on the scale of literacy right there in 10 seconds. I know where he's at. This tells me how to speak to him. You follow me? Because if you're talking to a college professor who has a degree in English, you can speak to him in a very different way from the way you would speak to, let's say, a sanitation worker who never graduated high school, right? There's a
Yeah.
difference in
Yeah.
literacy. So this tells you in very specific ways how to deal with people.
Mm-hmm.
And the best part of this is I can absolutely guarantee to anyone who reads this book, it will save you from catastrophes, disasters, indictments, bankruptcies, divorces, and all kinds of other things because it forewarns you with whom you are dealing. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
for example, let's take the scale of basic purposes, okay, the first scale in the book. Hitler's basic purpose was to destroy. Okay, most people can't even get their minds wrapped around the idea that the person's intention is to destroy, because it really makes no sense to a normal person. But that's what he was about. And if you study the man, you can see that he was destructive not only to the enemies of Germany, he was destructive for everybody. He was
Yeah.
destructive to his own military, to his own nation. Okay, he was a destructive person. Now, if you spot somebody who's at that level, you are very smart to get away from the person. I'm not saying to tell them or attack them or anything, just get away from them. Okay, and this goes across all 35 scales. So, for example, there's a scale of motivation. Let's say a guy is dating a woman and he's thinking about marrying her. He should assess, what is this woman's motivation toward me? You see, there are 7 possibilities. And the fact that there are only 7 possibilities is good because you're not choosing from amongst 1,000 possible motivations.
Yeah.
I did the heavy lifting by getting it down to 7 basic purposes, 7
Mm-hmm.
basic motivations, 7 basic
Mm-hmm.
levels on each scale. So he can look at it and he can see that maybe his motivation, her motivation toward him is that she wants his money, right? It's a mercenary purpose.
Yeah.
Or maybe her motivation is that she really loves him. See, that would create a very different outcome. But I can tell you when I was young, obviously I didn't have this information, it hadn't been discovered yet, and I made the same stupid mistakes that everybody else makes. Now that cannot happen, will not happen, and does not happen to me because I can assess people usually in seconds by using this information, and I know what I'm dealing with. Okay, I know what type of a person this is and at what level I want to deal with him or maybe not deal with him. Okay, and that's what I mean when I say it can prevent disasters, because
Yeah.
people, a guy will get infatuated with a woman and marry her, and it turns out she's a very downscale person, and he
Okay.
winds up having
Mm-hmm.
to divorce her, pay $50,000 to lawyers, and pay her alimony. Okay, which is a disaster, which all of could have been avoided by using this book
Okay.
because
So,
it's
Jim,
not
I
that
have one
hard.
question.
Yes,
Uh, you are saying that it is improving lives. It is all about improving lives, and we can improve our future by this, right?
yes,
So, like, I know this technique, right? Suppose I am one person who have read this technique, who have read about this technique, and who have learned all the skills that are required me to improve. So now that I have read, I have known about this, and I know my weaknesses, and I know how to communicate. I know how to proceed on my goals. So I'm an improved man now, right? So
Yes.
is this, can we create that chain of improvement? Like I know, can I transfer it to someone by being practical, by my being practical self, or that self has to read? Everyone have to read about this technique.
The best way to help another person with this book is to get them to use it to resolve a specific problem. And I'll tell you exactly what I mean. Let's say a parent has a child who's having trouble in school. And let's assume the kid is 12 years old, so he's old enough to read this book. So you sit him down and you say, here, read this glossary. Okay, now look at this scale of scholarship. And when he looks at that, in a matter of seconds, he will get a bracket. He will say, well, I can see that I'm certainly not at level 3, 2, or 1. I'm at one of these lower levels.
Yeah.
Okay, so you see, he's already narrowed it down. So then you say to him, okay, let's read the text and try to get it specific. And he will be able to do that. Then, let's say he finds us at level 4, he will have an
Hmm.
epiphany. He will say, okay, now I can understand why I was having trouble in school. I'm at level 4. That's not so good. And then you
Hmm.
can say, okay, let's move you up one level from 4 to 3, and then you will be a better student. You see? That's how you use it. Don't ever tell the person his level. Get the
Hmm.
person to figure it out himself, because when he figures it out himself, the light bulb will go on above his head. He
Yeah.
will look at these natural phenomena and he will see, I see there are 7 levels here and I'm at this particular level. That is a very liberating realization to have because it clarifies your mind. You know what you're about. You see? So,
Hmm.
for example,
Yeah.
helping somebody find his basic purpose.
Hmm.
Every person has one of 7 basic purposes. And most people live an entire lifetime at one level of that scale.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
when you help somebody find his basic purpose, that is tremendously helpful to him because what he does is he throws out the other 6. He knows what he's about. He's at this particular level, and that's what his life is about. That is extremely helpful to the person.
Hmm.
You see? And
Yeah.
if you do that to a person 1 or 2 times, he's going to go out and get the book and say, I've got to read this. I've got to read all 35 of these, and he's going to use them. Okay?
Hmm.
Assuming he reads somewhat and he studies it seriously, this is a textbook on a new subject. So I tell everybody, start on page 1, just like you're studying a biology text or chemistry text or math text, and go through carefully, make sure you understand everything, study the glossaries, and then after you've read the whole book, go back and read it again. And when you come to each scale, find your level. And if you do that, you will be a better person, a significantly improved person by the time you finish. Now, of course, that is a limited usage of the book because there are literally thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of ways to use this book.
Yeah.
For example, let's take the scale of motivation. What is my motivation toward my mother? What is my motivation toward my son? What is my motivation toward my church? You see? And then you can say, what is my boss's motivation toward me? What is my brother's motivation toward me? And in each case, you're clarifying. Your mind gets clearer because you understand the relationship.
Yeah. Okay. So, Jim, this is the last question. Since
Okay?
your clarifications are inspiring me to read this book, so can you please tell me and the audience about the availability of your book, like the platforms on which it is available, so that
Okay.
they can get it? Yeah.
Okay. First, I want to say I invite all of your listeners to go to my website, septemics.com, Septemics. On my website, you can see what many readers have said about the book, what many journalists have written about the book. You can see the reviews, and you can even read sections of the book. Okay? So then you'll get a really good introduction to what this is about. As far as getting the book, if you just type the word Septemics into a search engine, you'll get thousands of responses, including all the people selling the book, which of course includes Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and the publisher Author House. So it's very easy to find. And there's a hardbound, a softbound, and an ebook. Of course, the ebook is the least expensive, so you don't have to put a lot of money into this. And let me clarify, once you have the book, you don't need anything else. You don't need to join a club, you don't need to join a church, you don't need to go to a school, you don't need to hire somebody. Everything is in the book. I was very careful to make this a user-friendly book that the person can use by himself. The only thing you might need is a dictionary, but that's true for every book in the world.
Okay, that's so nice. Okay,
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 that's
okay.
cool.
Yeah, okay, that's really cool. So,
And I would like to say one thing in closing to
yes,
you and all of your
yes,
listeners.
yes, please.
The data in this book are vital for every human being and can help you to achieve your goals faster and easier by explaining what might otherwise seem to be inexplicable or random. If
Okay,
someone were to invite you to a rendezvous, you would certainly expect them to tell you the exact location and perhaps also how to get there and the time. Needless to
okay.
say, it's very difficult to get somewhere if you don't know where you are, don't know where you're going, and don't know how to get to your destination. Now, this sounds idiotic, but most people do this regularly. This book solves that. It tells you across 35 axes where you are, where you will go if you succeed, and where you will go if you fail. It's very specific and it's not hard to use.
Thank you so much for putting your precious time into that. I hope our listeners and have learned a lot from this, and they'll get the book, of course. So, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much, and I hope I help some people as a result of this.